We're going.
All right, here's your Atlas Alco switcher with sound and N scale. See if maybe the video will pick up the sound. So yes, you can get sound from just about anything. And we were talking before about steam, and you had talked about, somebody asked about Broadway Limited. There. Now this is a Broadway Limited Paragon 2. And Broadway Limited puts in all sorts of extras, like the illuminated class lights in front and back. And even little details like the bell gets a double clang. It's an actual clapper and a bell. And it tapers off. Reverse. And Broadway Limited gives you smoke also. Now, Broadway also in HO, you can adjust the volume level on 27 different sound effects. So you can make the chuffing louder, the bell louder, the whistle lower, the spitter valves and blow down sounds and everything.
What are you adding liquid for the smoke?
Yeah, use liquid just same as in the old Lionel trains.
Yeah.
Now, the question before had been about the Paragon 3. Paragon 3 sound is this same engine, this same sound system, but it's Bluetooth enabled. There's a Bluetooth transmitter inside. Then you have setting underneath the layout a subwoofer that's about this big with a Bluetooth receiver. As a train gets close, it transmits the low frequency sounds to the subwoofer. And if, I don't know if anyone's got a sound system at home with subwoofer, you get a boom. That's what the low sounds go to it. And it even vibrates the floor and the table slightly. And then as it passes and it starts going away, the sound just doesn't cut off, it tapers off. It's almost kind of a Doppler effect to it. I was saying about technology, like, oh, where are they going to go next? Well, now they're even throwing in the vibrations from the subwoofer. I keep wanting the next thing they need to do is have black smoke come out of that when it's working hard.
And you can get all over the passengers the way it used to
Yeah. Now, an engine with smoke, there's other considerations. You know, what goes up must come down, and that smoke, that's a particulate in it, it'll settle back down, and it will put a residue on the rails after a while. Scale rails, from my understanding, is banned smoking locomotives on their layout because of that. At first I didn't believe it. I said, yeah, no. Then I noticed this test track kept getting dirty and having a problem with running all the time because of the smoke. It's demonstrating an engine to somebody, yeah, I'm going to have the smoke on. I wish I had a Broadway Limited Norfolk and Western Y6B, big articulated engine. The sound in it was just phenomenal. It was just much, much louder than this. But again, it's a matter of adjusting volume controls too. But yeah, that's what the Paragon 3 is. It's the subwoofer and broadcasting to it. And now that they've got that ability to transmit via Bluetooth, there's no telling where they'll go. Bachmann has released, I can't think what they call it now, but they've got a couple of train sets, and they've got some individual locomotives, and they're Bluetooth enabled, and you run it with your smartphone.
Yeah.
You download the app, and you sit here, and the little thing comes up with a throttle and a reversing lever, and you run the locomotive from your smartphone. Again, the technology is just advancing in leaps and bounds, and quite limited only to one's imagination. And that's the fun part. Part of the fun part about this hobby is that you can do whatever you want to do, or whatever you can imagine that you saw in the past. There he is. Now that wasn't a shopping break. No, that was. All right, we'll go back to another set of questions. Anybody?
What's the new thing that NMRA is pushing that talks about too much power on your DCC and adding a second bus? I'm confused.
Basically what they're talking with stuff like that is huge layouts. This layout over here, it's a little over 60 feet from one end to the other, and there's a bus, two 12-gauge wires that run the whole length. One of the things that they're talking about, I haven't done it, and so far I haven't seen any problems, but putting I don't know what the rating's on it, it's a capacitor and I think 2 resistors together like this, that you put across the bridge at the far end. And it prevents something from happening. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's something that found out with large layouts with a long bus. They have problems with the signal on the DCC controls. But also, again, large layouts. You need boosters and amplifiers. You can daisy chain these boosters. And you say you've got a layout that's like the size of this store. You might have to go along about 30 feet and then daisy chain in another booster here with track connections to keep your power equal. Because, yeah, DCC, it's the same voltage on the track all the time. There's 14 volts available there. And the decoder decides how much of it it wants to use. But over distance, basic electricity tells you that your voltage is going to drop with the length of the run. So that's why the basic reason for a bus underneath the layout is about every 10-12 feet you drop a pair of leads down, because you're going to get better current flow through that large gauge wire than you will through the rail. And there's also no rail joints and switches and diamond crossings and all that in your way. But if you get a layout that large, yes, you have to make other considerations on what you're doing. It's a far cry from a 4x8. And just only from experience so far with this layout, like I say, there's, on the HO layout, there's 2 scale miles of main line. Once around is 2 miles, 1 mile around on the O gauge. We've run into no problems. We do have a bus and drop leads down about every 10 or 12 feet. And using this throttle right here, we had no problems. It was, before we put the bus in, we were running a train all the way around that 120 feet of track. And down the far end, it slowed down a little bit. So, all right, we don't want that, and especially using DCC, you've got to have that full voltage available. Because you saw when you put the DC engine on, or the DCC engine with the regular throttle, you got to get this throttle up about 2/3, 3/4, because it needs at least minimum 7, upwards of 10 or 11 volts to get the thing functioning and to move. I was reading the other night that I think it's the new Paragon engines. You can go in and program, tell it that you can program the engine, that's what it was, not that you're going to run it on DC, and you set the starting voltage down lower so that you can run it better with a DC throttle. That thing about once you get the decoder in the engine, it's programmable to do just about anything you want. And again, this business of programming it to run better on DC is something new also, that's just recently come up. Just like what you were saying about they're finding out these things about long runs with a bus that you've got to do additional things to it. The more stuff is used, the more stuff is played with, they're going to find out things, and then the engineers get into it and they come up with new little gizmos and gadgets to make it all run better. And then we're the beneficiaries of that. We get better toys to play with.
Some of the engines have to go at higher speeds to make the thing run. Is that normal? You know, you have to add additional, you know, on your.
Well, this here, when you throw this throttle up here on it,
Yeah.
you're not increasing voltage or anything. There's always, there's 14 volts.
It
on
goes
ground.
up to what? One.
Well, there's,
what do I say,
it's
the
called,
128?
well, on this it's called speed steps.
Yeah.
And this comes, the default setup is 28 speed steps, 0 to 28. And you can change it to make it 128 speed steps.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's NCE, somebody else has got, I think it's 256 speed steps. The more finely you divide down the, you know, the number of speed selections, because that's what it is. It's not, this is a infinite setting on an old rheostat. This here, there's actually, it's this or it's that. It's like the clicking of a clock. It's either that or that. So the more you fine that down, the more better speed control you have. You can get it to run even slower. Now, this just on 28 speed steps. That's speed step 1. I'm not quite sure why you'd want it to run any slower.
But if you, some engines it seems will start at.
Yes, they're different engines. Have got different. The Bachmann engines, you've got to, HO engines, you've got to get them up to speed step 5 or 6 or 7 before they'll move. You can then throttle it back down to maybe 5 and it'll keep running. And again, but that's something that can be programmed in or changed by what the program, I forget what the function is. It's different engines, different functions, or CVs, the starting voltage.
Yeah.
And again, if you go to 128 speed steps rather than 28, you lower that number. But it's an arbitrary number. If you can get it to run at this speed, doesn't matter whether it's speed step 1 or speed step 7, you're still running it slow. A lot of this stuff that you read about, it's people that are as much a programmer as they are a model railroader. Yeah. And I'm sorry. That's why people, programmers like the DigiTrack system, as I call it, that's for button pushers. To do everything, you got a whole bunch of buttons. NCE is pretty straightforward. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. Very good.
Let's see. That's the beauty with that, just, you know, speed step 1, just walk away from it.
All right, that's for your next class, but I think that's probably what I'm having trouble with some of my engines, is getting them
To run slowly.
to run slowly, yeah.
Again, is it an engine that came from the factory with a decoder? Or is
Yes.
it one that you put
No.
it
From the factory.
It's factory, okay. Are they Bachmann engines?
No.
Those-
Yeah, they are. Yeah, a couple of them are.
Okay.
I
With
think there's
sound?
yeah. Yes.
Okay. The Bachmann engines with sound take the highest voltage to get them going. Pull one out of the case and put it on here. It'll take, I say, speed step 7, 8 before it'll move. The sound will come up first, but then to get it to move, you've got to crank it up a little bit.
Yeah.
But again, it's the same as anything else. It can be programmed away. Maybe not entirely. Now, that's when you put two engines in a consist together. Then you have to go in again and use all these scary buttons down here, and you speed match them. So that when you put the consist together, the throttle knows that, all right, I got the Atlas engine that's going to start moving on speed step 2. I got the Bachmann engine that's going to move at speed step 7. And it'll adjust the signal so that they move together with the throttle response will go together. It'll give speed step 1 to him or 2 to him and 7 to him so they move. So that it's not this guy pushes against it and then this guy takes off,
Yeah.
which is always the thing that you always had with the DC throttle. You couldn't do multiple unit lash ups of different manufacturers. The other thing is, if you're modeling a mountain railroad, you need pushers. Well, in DC, you have a slight slip of the throttle and the pusher engine throws the whole train in the ground. But with DCC, you've got one guy running the head end, and you've got the pusher in the back, and all you've got to do is pay attention to the slack and put just enough push on the drawbar to keep the train going up the hill without throwing all the cars in the ground. Because you've got DCC, you can have the engines together running at the same time, two separate engineers, you get to actually work like the engineers really did, like a N&W coal train going up through the Appalachians. And the engineer in the back end had to listen to what was going on in the seat of his pants on whether he was, he was actually pushing the train or pushing it too much, and listen to the way the things were running. And you get to do the same thing. And that's where we're going with all this technology, is putting that much more fun level in it. Who else? Sir?
Could you just give me a little insight, if you're running an N or a HO or maybe even S, what gauge wire do you feel like you should be doing your layout with?
You're talking about the wire from
Well,
here to the track?
Well, or just when you're wiring up your boards.
Inside?
Yeah.
We've got packs of wire up there. Basically, it's 30 gauge wire inside the locomotive.
Okay. What about if you're wiring your track?
From your power
you're making
supply
your
to
blocks.
the track.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're not going to use a bus, and again, it depends upon the length. If you're hooking up to the rail right here, here's your throttle, probably 20 gauge.
20 gauge for
Yeah.
NNHO or?
Yeah, either one. Because remember, with DCC, it's the same voltage. HO slightly higher amperage draw, but you're talking an eighth of an amp, a quarter of an amp. You can put a quarter of an amp through probably a 30 gauge, 30 or 35 gauge wire. It's not like Lionel where you're pushing 20 volts and an amp and a half. You got to have a decent sized wire. It's very low current, so you can use smaller gauge wire. But given distance, you got to increase your wire size the further away you get. Now, exact what gauge for the distance, that's kind of, maybe we'll discuss that in the next session.
When these says in the book, like for a bus, 16 is okay, but it'll work, but 14 is better.
14 is better, yeah, and then somebody says, well, then 10 gauge would be even really better. No, you start getting too big, then you're compounding your problems in the other direction. Again, it's a matter of distance. Battle there, we use 12 gauge. Somebody said we should have used 10. 12 works perfectly fine. And we run those big Lionel engines over there, wide open. I think that thing wide open is probably drawing an amp and a half, if not more. And actually, 12 gauge wire can handle 20 amps, I think. So, yep.
Would it make any difference if the wire was greater than multi-strain?
General recommendation on a bus, it should be a solid wire. And depending upon how you hook it up, like we did over there, we stripped the insulation off of it. And ran two screw eyes, like 6 to 8 inches apart. Put the two copper wires the whole length of it. Well, you can see it underneath here also. And then wherever you want power, you just drop the wires down to it. You don't have to worry about, I got strict insulation here, strict insulation there. As long as you don't have any risk of somebody going on and dropping something across the bus, you're all right. Which underneath the layout, I would imagine that would happen. And that gives you the ability to tap into it wherever you need to be. And then so you can use the bus for other things than just running trains. If you're going to use your select accessory button to run the turnouts and the track, that stationary decoder will get its power from the track right, or from the bus or the track right there. And that's another, you gotta figure the amperage draw on that, and you're looking at your total capacity that you need. You can tap it in for lighting in the buildings, where are operating gates or signals or something. Because it's a constant filtered voltage right there available all the time. You just gotta keep your total amperage draw in mind, because you've got 1,000 lights on the layout, and 12 switches, and you get the 2.5 amp power supply, you might be down to only running 1 or 2 engines.
Any problems with LEDs and DCC?
No, they're, the new LEDs are phenomenal. They're super, super bright and almost nil on amperage draw. We've got some over there, nano and pico LEDs that they're so small. They're actually smaller than the wire that supplies the power to them. The marker lights, that's a lens with a light in behind it. It's just tiny. And stuff like that you can wire up with like 30 gauge wire. But the LEDs with all the decoders, the sound decoders, the regular motor decoders, they've all got what's called lighting effects as a part of the board. Because all it is a set of diodes that gives you your constant lighting. So the light is on when the engine is just sitting still. And it stays at that constant voltage. And it's easier also because there's 14 volts in the track at all times. So you don't have to worry about with DC, you crack the throttle, run slow, and I don't have quite enough power to illuminate the light and all that business. And then there's all sorts of other lighting effects, like the Florida East Coast engine. You saw the ditch lights that the modern diesels have got now. And that one doesn't do it, although it can be programmed in. You can get the ditch lights to alternate. Some railroads do that. Whenever they hit the horn, the ditch lights flash back and forth. And then they go off back to steady until you hit the horn again. This one here, I don't know if you noticed, with the come stop and the cab light comes on. As soon as they get the throttle, cab light goes off. I mean, it's endless, all the little things you can do. Who is it? Somebody's engine, they have inspection lights now. On the diesel, on the real thing, there's little small lights above each truck, called an inspection light. So at night, the guy can just check the journals and the springs and everything in the power trucks. Or to get those in there now, because again, it's a little tiny pico and nano LEDs. Limited only to your imagination. Who else you got in there? All clear as mud, right?
Mm-hmm. Good. Thank you.
Any other subjects or sections?
When you're programming, do you have a programming track for that? Or should you?
Most of the systems today, including this one, allow you to do what's called programming on the main. But it can be a gamble. If you do something wrong, and you end up not, quote, programming on the main, and you're on the main, every engine that's sitting on the track will get whatever you just programmed. Like if you're putting an address in a locomotive, and you don't get it properly set up for programming on the main, you just turned every engine on the layout to address 3. And that's when you tear your hair out and go screaming into the night. Best thing to do is have, like this, piece of track, completely, totally isolated from the rest of the railroad. And you can do that, I mean, it can be a siding with double insulators. You run the train in, and then you've got a double pole, double throw switch. That way, it's connected to the programming. That way it's connected to the main line. And never the twain shall meet, so it's a positive one or the other. Some people just have a separate plug that you can unplug it. You know, there's got to be a physical disconnect from the rest of the layout for safety's sake. Even though they all say, most all of them say programming on the main. Sounds great, and yeah, it'll work if you do it right. If you don't do it right, and you punch that button wrong, you've just created havoc for yourself. And when you start getting into punching buttons, you can get lost sometime. NCE, all the company, NCE, pick up the phone and call them. They'll walk you right through it. Wait, if you don't find the answer in here. Wayne?
Isn't there an additional benefit to using the program track mode on NCE? Doesn't it?
There's
Isn't there
something
some
with
kind of
it-
safety concern
yeah,
there?
and it changes the power. It takes more power
On the main.
on the main to program it. And when you put it on the programming track or in programming mode on this, it doesn't draw as much power and it's easier to do things.
And the track doesn't have enough voltage to really.
And you're less
Yeah.
likely to burn up your decoder.
Exactly, in case you make a mistake.
Right. Speaking from experience.
Yeah, see, my track's getting dirty already, but just a little bit. It's amazing how much dirt can get on a track and a layout. You say, well, my house is air conditioned and, you know, the windows are always closed and there's no dust. I guarantee you, there's grime on the track. Just like the real locomotive, there's gonna be a certain amount of lubricant that's gonna migrate down and onto the rails. If you got a smoker engine, you just compounded that by about a factor of 50. Just ambient dust in the air. And you mix dust and oil, you get grime. That's why the little bright boy is probably that's the cheapest and best thing going. There are all kinds of fancy track cleaning cars, and yes, they really do work. And sometimes you get a really big layout, that's the only solution. But if you get a small layout, you polish that thing up and you're good to go. Who else got anything before we call it quit here for lunch?
You're gonna have another seminar in the future on the CV
Yep.
values and
Yep.
all that.
We're gonna have classes every 2 weeks, roughly. First one was airbrushing, the DCC today. 2 weeks from now it's gonna be on weathering, or beginning weathering. I don't think we'll set the class after that, have we?
Not yet.
But everyone's gonna be a different subject. And at some point, we will have the
Follow-up to
DCC
this,
Part
yeah.
Two. Just as we're gonna have airbrushing Part Two. This room in here used to be a restroom, that's a spray painting booth now. So when we have another air, you can actually come in and try an airbrush and see how it works, if you've never airbrushed before. Try to get everyone introduced to airbrushing, because it's the only way to go. Not just with painting models, but on your layout. Airbrush, paint your track, weather your buildings, everything. All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. I enjoyed it.
Thank
and,
you.
hopefully you learned a little bit.